Hey there. So the other day, Elise of Wild Moon Woman made a comment that got me thinking. Her statement, which is one that I can absolutely get behind, was essentially that how much can a belief change you if you don't do anything with it? And I think this is a concept that a lot of people can embrace and have shared, have held at some point. But what it got me thinking about was the idea of how does one ensure a belief changes them? How can one most easily translate a belief into actual change? And so today I decided I would just talk about this concept from the point of view of ritual as reinforcement. So that idea that ritual can be used for exactly that purpose, to help you translate a belief or new wisdom or a piece of enlightenment or an intention into the physical realm. Ritual is obviously a central component of a lot of pagan practices, although of course by no means all. But I would wager that most people listening to this right now do engage in ritual, and from my point of view, I do it for a number of reasons. It's a means of engaging with aspects of myself that are central to my spirituality. It acts as a form of communion with the divine and with energies that we want to get closer to, interact with, learn from. A large proportion of my aha moments of enlightenment, if you will, have come during ritual. And in fact, many of my rituals really center on exactly that, exploring ideas and concepts, learning. Tarot path working, for instance, is that. It's seeking wisdom regarding the cards through communion with the cards. And of course, spellcraft, although some may argue that's not strictly speaking ritual. You can define these terms very narrowly. But for the sake of today's discussion, let's just group them all together and define ritual as the use of behaviors, actions, ceremony, and interaction with objects in the physical plane for some sort of spiritual purpose. So what about this idea of thinking of ritual as a means of reinforcing a concept, some abstract idea that doesn't have tangible existence? Many of us seek to improve ourselves one way or another. We gain something from our spiritual practices that we feel would benefit us if we could implement it, and we may run into a few issues with that implementation, resulting in essentially never doing anything about it. I don't know about you guys, but I've certainly had my fair share of aha moments that never materialized into anything. Moments where it was clear that I should really make these changes, and yet I failed to. Even with the best intentions, it can be incredibly difficult to latch onto an idea and say, okay, I'm going to apply this now. That is, of course, easier said than done, particularly when you're talking about ideas that require or demand a change in the way you interact with the world on a day-to-day basis, a change in some fundamental aspect of your behavior or your interactions with others. And one of the issues, I think, is that unless you go out of your way to ensure it, that idea remains fixed in the immaterial realm. It remains an idea, intangible. It doesn't penetrate into the world. But of course, as witches or pagans who engage in ritual behavior, we have exactly the tools to fix that, and that's the use of ritual. In much the same way you might use sympathetic magic in order to symbolically mimic some desired goal. You can translate concepts, thoughts, and feelings into, if not physical objects themselves, physical actions, physical effects. And in so doing, I think, bring them into existence with greater efficacy and with more force, give them more capacity to influence you in turn. An idea or a concept can give you shivers, but the visceral effects don't have to end there. By making those ideas tangible through translation into ritual, not only can you sort of kickstart the change you're attempting to make, but it gives you a ready and accessible means to re-evoke those feelings, to stress the import of those concepts by re-engaging with the behaviors that you use to make those concepts tangible to begin with. And in some ways, I kind of think of this as being similar to that theorem that states that dreaming is really about and really serves from an evolutionary standpoint as a means to practice engaging with situations that you haven't experienced yet. When you dream about being attacked by a predator, for instance, that experience in the dream world trains your mind so that if that were to happen in the real world, you would have some practice, some jumping off point from which to react and with which to survive, which is like translating theory to mental practice. Well, in this case, I'm suggesting very much the same thing. The translation of theory to mental practice would be immersive visualization, would be working at an astral altar. And in and of itself, I think would be beneficial. But you can take it a step further and bring it into the real world. Give it a body made up of the actions you do while circling or whatever constitutes ritual for you. And this idea that marking something with ritual, using it to bring a concept into actual physical fruition, isn't a new one. Ritual rites of passage exist everywhere. And I'd argue that part of what makes those ritual rites of passage so meaningful and effective is that they are the physical manifestations of ideas. But we don't have to limit those rites of passage to sweet 16s or your first kill on the hunt. The moment you realize that all the symbolism around you for the past week has been pointing you in the direction of studying something new, you can launch that with ritual. And I think doing so helps get around another issue that I, at least, have experienced before, which is a strange sort of perfectionism when it comes to manifesting ideas, enacting ideas or changes. You know, I made a casual comment the other day while watching one of several videos by people in the YouTube pagan community who are making their own books of shadows. And I said that I tend to have a very hard time with fancy journals and fancy books. As much as I love the concept, I can never quite bring myself to write in them, because hell's forbid I should fuck up on the third page and then ruin the whole thing. Now, the way I get around that in my practice is my book of shadows is the same as my book of mirrors, is the same as my tarot journal, is all of those things. And it is a basic black moleskin notebook. And the pens I use to write in it, shitty 12 for $1.99 ballpoint pens. That's it. And so I beat this tendency toward obsessive perfectionism by chucking any hope of achieving it out the window before I start. And that's how I get to engage more authentically with my journals and my books of shadows. Just because a thing is holy doesn't mean we have to treat it like it's precious. And I think a similar approach to the ones I use with my book of shadows can be applied to ritual, particularly when faced with a concept that seems really key and that you simply can't start, can't get going because you haven't found the right way to engage with it yet, because you're waiting for some momentous scenario in which it is perfect to apply it, which demands its application. But of course, you could wait all year waiting for that opportunity, and I have, and then just forget about it when the opportunity arises because you haven't been practicing this ideology, which I have also done. And then at that point, like Elise said, what's the point? You have this wonderful concept that you could be applying, but because you're so concerned about applying it the right way the first time, you never get around to using it at all. So what I'd like to suggest instead is to take these ideas and translate them into ritual, and do so quickly. Do it now. Don't let more than a day go by between that momentous realization that you need to embrace some idea and bringing it into the world through ritual. Keep it casual. Don't worry about getting it all right or perfect. Not if you have any tendency towards perfectionism. I think in particular that this is a problem for rituals that can be equated with rites of passage. How many people have you known who've been so excited for their perfect sweet 16, their perfect wedding, their perfect fill in the blank? by spending so much time ruminating on the event rather than the purpose, and doing so in an environment in which they control absolutely their own imagination. 90% of the time, the real material thing will be a letdown. So chuck the aspiration of making something flawless and perfect, which are not, incidentally, the only ways to make something memorable, right? And here, for instance, what I try to do is be creative, be inspired. For this sort of thing, do something that you haven't done before. Do something wild and weird. Do something that's unique in your practice. And if you've watched my video on olfactory processing, you'll note that uniqueness is something I bring up then too. Uniqueness is something you can hang a tag on. And in this case, that unique aspect of your ritual, well, that's the physical body in all its imperfections of the concept that you seek to manifest. Finally, keep it tangible. You can do some of the work at an astral altar or with visualization. You can speak words in your head, but to really anchor it in the material world, make sure that you include tactile aspects. As ever, I really think that we miss out on something when we don't engage with our sensation. And I at least have found that when I do all of these things, it's like taking that first step on a really hard hike. Once I'm moving, I can keep engaging with the idea. I can draw it out more easily. I'm less worried about not using it to its full potential because I've already blown that opportunity. I've already failed to do so the first time around. So it very much gives the sense of, well, there's nowhere to go but up from here. Sorry about the little pings, I'm getting some texts. Anyways, I just wanted to chat about that for a little bit, and I set it, in case you're wondering, to the image of me actually doing just this sort of thing, trying something that I haven't yet done. In this case, I'm making an external sheath for a ritual candle. That layer of wax will be lifted once it's cooled and wrapped around a pillar that I've already poured. As always, I welcome comments, any discussion, and thank you very much for popping by for a listen. Take care and have a wonderful night.